Welcome to the Creative Writing Workshop podcast. This is the first in a series of 4 workshops on the elements, and the title of this episode is Air. You'll need a pencil and notebook, or the notes app on your phone, or maybe a beautiful, fresh, new blank word screen. The first few minutes will be a writing warm-up, and then I'll talk a little bit about why I chose the topic and why it's interesting for writers, and we'll get to some writing exercises. During the writing exercises, I'll speak about every 2 to 5 minutes to give you a chance to concentrate in between. And remember, every moment of silence in this podcast is an invitation to you to put some words down on paper. Towards the end of the main exercise, I'll give you an opportunity to press pause, and then you can write for longer if you like. Of course, you can press pause at any time. And at the end, I'll invite you to reflect a little on your writing and what we've achieved today. So let's dive straight in with a warm-up. This is a free writing warm-up. Just keep writing, move your hand the whole time. Don't cross anything out and just keep going. Don't worry about spelling or punctuation or grammar. Words on the page is all that matters for the next 10 or so minutes. So for this one, we're going to start from our own physical bodies. I would like you simply to hold your breath and describe how your body feels as you hold your breath for as long as you can. I'm sure you've all taken more breaths by now. So you can follow that up with taking a deep breath in, holding it for as long as you can, then breathing out as slowly as you possibly can, and keep describing all the time how that feels in your lungs and your heart and your head. And now you might move to the opposite idea, which is to empty your lungs and then breathe in as slowly as you possibly can and describe how that feels to your own human body. And now, in the final few moments of this exercise, you might concentrate on your normal breathing and describe how that feels after you've been breathing in, breathing out, being very intentional to filling and expelling your lungs. Can you bring your attention to breathing normally? And now I'll bring us to the end of the warm up. If that's really working for you and you're enjoying it and you'd like to delve into those sensations more, then obviously you can just press pause now. If not, you can bring the current idea that you have to some kind of intentional pause. It might be the end of a sentence, it might be a couple of bullet points with keywords of something you want to return to. And I invite you to reflect a little bit about what you can see on the page. Does anything interest you about what you wrote down about that sensation of holding your breath, breathing out, breathing in? Or was any of it particularly tricky to write, awkward to describe, so awkward that you want to unpack why you chose that sequence of words and maybe go back to those and explore them a little more? It's very interesting that in fiction, we often ask characters to use their breath. So we will describe them as sighing or gasping. We might put them through action sequences that would make their heart race and, their breath come really fast. Or we might put them in very awkward social situations where they struggle to find their breath and express themselves. But sometimes I think as writers, we can skim over how extreme that can feel when you're in it in the moment, how much you feel your breath when you find that you can't take one, or how much you rely on your normal breathing and fail to notice it until suddenly you're gasping or sighing. So I think that's just by focusing in on your own breath there and actually making yourself feel that sensation. The idea is that when you're writing and you come across a character gasping or sighing, you can just pause and reflect, okay, but exactly how does that feel for that character? Is there any benefit in giving the reader some extra detail to build that empathy with the character and how they're feeling at the moment? Air, I think, is a really interesting element to have a think about in terms of fiction. It's related to our sense of touch, and we might think about how we would use it to describe something incredibly delicate, lighter than air. But it can also play a role when we're writing about landscape and distance, when your character is looking over, the countryside or a cityscape. Is the air fresh or damp or cold or hot? Air is part of our experience of temperature and our surroundings. And as with the story of Icarus, it might make our characters overconfident. Perhaps the air is friendly and makes us feel that danger is far away. But air can also play a part as humans in sensing danger. It can warp our perceptions, such as a heat haze, and make us feel that we're not perceiving the world in exactly the way it should be. We use the phrase, there's something in the air, and it can provide us with that creepy sensation that not everything is right, but neither we or our readers or our characters can work out exactly what is wrong. And of course, if we think about the classic setting of a haunted house, the slightly musty, stale air, and the idea of there being no life and movement in this house is part of what gives those settings their archetypal kind of creepy horror. So this is going to be, I think, a very quick session today, but I hope that one you might return to over and over again as an interesting exercise. As I ask a lot in my workshops, I'm going to ask you to start with a character. This person is going to have a name and an age. And we might also, for today's exercise, give them a job. They might be a young person, a teenager, a student, something like a police officer or a doctor. And I've chosen those three specifically. You'll see why in a minute. I'm going to ask you to write a scene in which this character, your main character, whose head we can see into, whether it's first person or third person limited, we can see into their mind, so we know their thoughts. They can communicate those to us as the reader. But in the scene, they're only going to communicate using their breath. So breaths and huffs and sighs, maybe the occasional hum or humph, the tiniest of vocalizations, but mostly they're going to just communicate using their breath. For the other character in the scene, maybe use someone who's asking for help or causing a fuss. It could be a character who you are working on in one of your stories, a side character from one of your works in progress. Could be somebody completely new. If you have nothing and you're a beginner and your notebooks are fairly blank, then maybe pick a doctor and a patient coming to ask them for help. But the doctor isn't going to reply using any words whatsoever. They're only going to reply using their breath. So let's start writing that and see where it takes us in terms of how a character might use just their breath, just the air to communicate. And if you're settling in, then you can ignore this prompt. But if you need something else, the character who's using only their breath, whose mind we can see into, make sure that they are a very observant person. Let's have them begin to pass some kind of judgment or think deeply about the speaking person they have in front of them. And once again, if you're enjoying your writing, then ignore me. But otherwise, remember you can let your speaking character experience heightened emotion. There might be some panic here or some anger. There might be a little bit of desperation or frustration. And you don't have to dial that all the way up into melodrama. You can also allow it to seep into their body language and the way they speak. They can be trying to hide that emotion and it's just creeping in at the edges. And once again, if you're enjoying your writing and you don't need anything else, ignore this prompt. But if you're finding that you're running out of steam, have your main character, the one who is using only their breath, decide that they're going to answer using words. But at the last moment, they withhold. So they think to themselves about what their answer, what their spoken sentence in this scene might be, but ultimately decide not to say it. And now, once again, you can ignore this prompt. But if you need something else, allow this character to focus on their own breath for a moment. So perhaps some of what they've been experiencing before is unconscious. And now we can bring awareness of their own lungs and heart and air and oxygen. Bring that to the surface for them and have them think about it. And for the last prompt for this session, why don't you think about having these two people bring their conversation to a swift close, and your character who's been communicating with their breath gets to go out into the fresh air. So let's explore this idea of things ending, a sense of relief, a sense of fresh air and openness being part of that relief, things they can see in the distance, things they can see in the air. So we've had this quite intense conversation. We've focused really internally on that breath, and now we'll just throw the shutters open and see what else is out there. And now, if you'd like to keep writing for a few more minutes, then do hit pause. If you're going to stay with me, then you can begin to bring your work to some kind of close. Could be the end of a sentence, the finishing off of a thought, some finality in a conversation or observation that your character is making. So we don't like to cut ourselves off too abruptly, but finish with a sense of achievement. And now it's time to look back and have a think about the writing. I often say to my students, there are two aspects to writing. There's the writing and there's the thinking about writing. So let's do the thinking part. It'd be interesting, I think, for you to read back and think about who had power in this scene. So it might seem obvious that the person withholding their voice, communicating through tuts and sighs and gasps, it might seem obvious to you that they had the power because there's power in withholding. But others may not have written a scene like that. Perhaps the person couldn't get their words out or struggled to speak, couldn't identify what they wanted to say. So worth noting with this exercise, I think, who had the power in this exchange? You might also ask yourself, who are these two people that have been talking today? What brought them into this scene? What was happening just before you met them in this exchange where one of them couldn't use their voice? And where will they go afterwards? You've set these two people up. You've explored this exchange between them. What will happen next? What will the effect of this conversation be on the rest of their lives? And clearly, if you are writing about a doctor-patient interaction, it might be a very profound one. Perhaps it's more light-hearted. Perhaps one of your characters decides a rule for themselves that they'll follow going forwards. I'm never talking to that type of doctor again, or I'm never going back to this surgery practice. Perhaps this is the last patient the doctor will ever see. This is the end of the final straw, the end of their career. But have a think about what effect the conversation might have on them. And finally, is there anything in the words you have written that might actually take place in a different scenario? Writing workshops like this are aimed to inspire you, to get you going, with the aim that you'll take some ideas from this time into your writing practice, which isn't led and guided. So you could read the piece back that you've written today and think to yourself, what if I just took these 2 lines of dialogue, or this 1 line of description, or this single description of how it feels to not breathe or to not speak? And what if I take that as a jumping off point for something entirely different, abandon these characters, leave them to the page, and jump in and write something else entirely? Remember, that's always the aim. Or maybe you want to stay with these characters and develop them further. You can have a look at the episode Sketching a Character if you want to take the time to get to know one of these people, or both of them, and find out what they mean to each other. And finally, same as every time, I think it's always nice to read back and draw around any or highlight any words or phrases that you like, that you enjoy, that are funny or dramatic, or a nice turn of phrase or a lovely description, because it's good to celebrate when we enjoyed our writing and it came out on the page as something we're proud of. And what's nice is if you just mark it or highlight it, and when you're going back through the writing that you do, which we all do sometimes to kind of reflect and draw on it, then you'll be able to see some of the good stuff leaping out at you, which isn't always the first 3 or 4 words that we write down, but when we go back and read through, it's always the first phrases that we read. So it can be good to have something eye-catching on the page to guide us to what we reflected on and what we want to learn from any specific writing session. I hope you enjoyed today's session. We'll be carrying on with the elements. Of course, I cannot now for the life of me remember which one I'm going to do next. So you can join me next time for fire or water or earth. It will be a bit of a surprise for all of us. And thank you again for joining me today. I hope you had fun.